In this video, we're going to begin to add detail to our fender flare. Hey everyone, this is Matt with Learn Everything About Design, and in this video, we're going to finally get to add some detail to this fender flare that we've been working on. So it's taken quite a while to get to this stage, and hopefully you followed along and you understand all the important design steps that we made along the way. At this stage, we now have probably the most simplified version of geometry that we can create. So before we add any detail, we need to be happy with the shape that we have. So this is the point in which we want to make sure that we take a really good look at the way that the fender is shaping up. And if we want to make any drastic changes, now is the time to do so. We're also going to be attaching it to the mesh before we add any detail. And when I say attach, we're not actually physically attaching it, we're just going to pull some vertices close. Now, this is an important step in the process because it will have an overall effect on the shape. And again, note that we are looking at creating a ridge. And it's going to be just a very gentle ridge, but that's going to carry around the scoop. And it's going to come down here to this other detail that comes off of the door. So again, we want to make sure that we're in roughly the right place with our lines. So we're going to begin by going to Modify, Edit Form, and I want to pull this to be up fairly close to where we want it to be. And I'm going to take this, sort of pull it up and back. I'm going to do the same thing with this vertex here, pull it up and back a little bit, and maybe pull this one down and forward. Take this vertex, and again, what I'm looking for here is roughly a straight line. It doesn't have to be perfect, but I want to make sure that everything stays nice and smooth. And then we need to really think about what this shape is going to look like. If we look at it from the front, that's a pretty nice shape. I'm pretty happy with the general shape. And again, we don't have any hard edges or hard details, but I'm really happy with those transitions. So I'm not going to do too much in terms of a drastic shape change, but now we have the sort of general shape. I'm going to go ahead and use the pull tool. Notice that I'm in smooth display for this. When we go into pull, note that we have surface points and control points. Now, it's really important at this stage that we use surface points because that's the final shape. Then I'm going to begin pushing these down to the mesh. This will begin to have some drastic effect to the shape. Let's not worry too much about it at this point. Just make sure that we can find those surface points. We can put them to the mesh. And again, we're going to do this underneath as well. This one might be a little bit tricky. We can manually move it around if we need to. This would be the point if we were going to carry around the original body that we would attach some of these points. We're not going to, so I'm going to carry on up here. And again, sort of work my way back. And then at the very bottom, I want to take that all the way to the mesh and that there as well. So when we look at this, it's important at this stage to really know and understand that we're not perfectly aligned to the shape of the body. And that's because we don't have all of the edges added that we need to. And that's okay because we need to be extremely careful with the way in which we add these edges, because before we were kind of far away from the body, and if we just started adding edges for that control, it would get really messy and difficult for us to sort of work on that shape. The front edge of this is looking okay. We will have to do a little bit of work to get that to sort of blend nicely into this intake scoop, but until we're at that stage, we're not going to do anything. So I'm going to go back to a box display. And now is the stage or the point in which we want to begin to figure out where our details or our controls are going to be. I know that I want to add a little bit more around the fender flare. I want to give it a little bit of a lip. So I'm going to double click that. And this is a good sign because you can see that we've got an entire loop selected. Now, before I do that, notice that this one point is kind of hanging out there in space. Let's fix that before we go any further. So I'm going to go to Edit Form. I want to pull this up to be more in line with where the actual arch is. Then I'll say OK. So again, we're going to double click. I'm going to go to Modify, Insert Edge. It's on the wrong side, so I'm going to use a negative value. And negative 0.5 is going to be a bit too much. I want it to be fairly close because what I'm looking to do is create sort of an artificial crease. If we want to keep the shape exactly how it is now, we would want to use exact. In this case, we're going to use simple, and we're going to take a look at the smooth display and Control 4 to get rid of that edge. And you can see what we've done is we've added sort of like a very general crease. And you can see that it's affected some other areas, but you can see that we've got that little bit of a flat spot there. So let's go back to box display. And if that result wasn't great, we can use Control Z to undo. And we can try another method. We can try bevel edge. This time I'm going to use that sort of a same value. I'm going to use 0.1. I'm going to say OK. Go back to smooth display, Control 4. And you can see here it's a very similar result. Not too much is different. One of the benefits of using that bevel edge is that we have the ability to add more than 2 edges if we want. So if we go into bevel edge, we could add 3 potentially. It's going to be a bit extreme, but we could certainly do that. Let's go back to a box display, double click, say OK. And then again, let's go back to our smooth display, hide the edges. And you can see here that we were able to give it a little bit more of a crease there. Again, not exactly what we're going to do here, so we're going to Control Z that and undo. But just note that we do have some of these options. Another thing that we can do to temporarily force the issue is to crease that. And I'm not really at that point yet, but what I want to do is I'm going to say modify, insert edge. I'm going to do simple, both, and I'm going to put a tighter value in here. So I'm going to say 0.05. Then again, smooth display, Control 4, and just take a look at the result. It's a little bit harder to see, but we have a more apparent crease there. It is still smooth, but we've added that harder sort of lip, that harder crease. And we could certainly come back and we could play with the location of these edges. We could use slide edge. We could select that, go to modify and slide edge. And we could pull that in closer. You're going to have to do this wherever the cursor is. We can pull that in a little bit tighter. Go back to our smooth display, Control and 4. It's really a good idea that you get comfortable with those options on a PC. Control or Command or Control 4 and 6 for the edge display. So 6 brings it back, 4 gets it away, and Alt and 1 and 3 to go back and forth between box and smooth display. So if we're happy with the shape, at that point we can work with these edges. If you want to do more drastic changes, then you should certainly do them before you get to that point. But the next thing that I want to do is I want to figure out how to carry a harder shape up into this fender. So looking at this shape, I want to bring back the mesh. Looking at this shape and how it sort of aligns to the body, that looks pretty good, but I want to start to introduce some sort of seam here. So I'm going to select that edge. I'm going to go to Modify, Insert Edge. This time we're going to do a single for now. And I want it to be on the positive side. I want it to be coming up, but you can see the preview is pushing it down. Remember, with whatever glitch is happening right now, the preview is always the positive direction, at least that's what it seems. I'm going to increase this value. I'm going to put it not in the middle, but I want to put it a little bit farther out, so 0.15. And now we've added this edge. So again, Control and 4. Now you can see that we're starting to get a little bit more of a detail here. So Control 6 to bring the edges back. Take a look at it from the side. Now what we can do, if we want to have an actual crease or a true crease, and we want to carry it about where the door line is, you can double click on this, go to Modify, Insert Edge. This time I'll do a both. I'm going to tighten this value up a little bit. We're going to do 0.05, say OK. Let it calculate, Control 4, and you can see now we've got a little bit harder edge, and it flares out here. You can see it's kind of flaring out into the fender flare. These are not very drastic changes. These are minor changes, but these are the kind of details that you would begin to add at this stage. And if we want to do anything drastic, like pull that crease out a bit more, then what we need to do is we need to take these vertices and we need to start to pull them out. And we can do that with our scale tool. So if we go into Modify, and let's say that we select these vertices here. I'm going to select these ones, and I'm going to select these ones. Remember, we're going to make sure that we leave it attached to the car here, and I don't want to affect the fender, so I'm going to reset my pivot. I'm going to stick it right there. And then I'm going to do this from a bottom view. It'll probably be a little bit easier. So let's go bottom view, make sure that we can see it. And you can see all of these vertices that I selected. Now if I begin to scale them, you can see that I'm getting them more into a horizontal position based on where my cursor is. So let's hop into smooth display, Control 4. And you can see now what we've done since we set our pivot point back here. It didn't really change anything back here. It's starting to sort of disappear. But you can see that we've added that harder edge. And again, we didn't do anything with the front, so that harder edge begins to disappear there as well. So really neat way to add sort of a harder edge or a harder feature and still good quality surfaces. So let's bring those edges back and let's take a look at the design at this point. So I'm going to step back a little bit. Let's hide those edges. Now we're beginning to add, some of these new details. We need to really work on getting the door detail to go around the scoop. We want to carry that crease around. That's going to be a little bit of a challenge. So let's take a look at this. Let's do a quick save. But let's take a look at this and see if we can figure out how to do this. First, I want to move this vertex down a little bit. Again, trying to look at it more in line. And let's say, okay, and let's just step back and take a look at the shape. So we've got this vertex here, and really what we want to do is we want to carry it around like this. If we try to do an insert edge, note that it stops right here. And one thing that you can do, if you're in like modify edit form and you double click an edge, then the loop that it selects or the loop that it grabs is going to be as far as that insert edge is going to go. So if I double click up here, you can see it stops right there. If I double click here, it's only that one edge. Here it kind of wraps around. And it's because we're changing directions. If we look over here, we double click, that's an entire loop. There's an edge loop and there's a ring. So I'm calling these loops, but these are the edges, the tangency that carries along. And whenever we're looking at something like insert edge, if you can double click an edge and get this to happen, that's the entire edge that you're going to be adding. Same thing down here. But because it stops right here, this is going to be a very tricky thing for us, and we need to really think about the way in which we can make this happen. Remember, we do have some tricks. So we can insert an edge here, we can insert one here, and then we can connect the two. But changing the direction is going to be the trick. So what I want to do is I want to take this edge and I'm going to offset it inward. So let's say, okay, let's go to insert edge. We're going to do a single direction. Remember the preview is going to show the positive direction. I'm going to do 0.05 negative, which puts it on the inside. Then I'm going to do the same thing here, insert edge. Again, the preview is in the wrong direction. It's going to be negative, and we're going to do the same thing down here as well. Remember, your right-click marking menu will repeat the last command. Then we're going to go to insert point. We want to go from here. Make sure we select that insert point. This is going to get tricky in this corner here. So what we're going to end up doing is deleting some of these edges and then merging these together to make sure we keep that foreside. I'm not to that point yet, but that is the workflow that we're going to be doing. So again, right-click, marking menu, repeat insert point. We're going to say OK. And now we need to come back and we need to figure out a way that we can make this a true four-sided patch. So we can use delete edge or we can use weld vertices. And for example, I can move this vertex to this one and that'll solve the problem for me. I need to do the same thing down here. I'm going to take this one to here. That maintains a four-sided face here, maintains a four-sided face here. We don't have any weird little triangles happening. But let's take a quick look at this in smooth display, see if we messed anything up. So Control and 4, you can see that crease is now carried around. Let's hide the body for a second. That crease is now carried around, but it's not really giving us the result we want. So let's work on this a little bit more. Back in box display, bring my edges back. Now if I double click on this, notice it carries all the way to this corner until we get to this star point. So remember, we've got 1, 2, 3, and then we got 4 and 5 here. So what I want to do is I want to move this edge, or I want to put one right in between to help that curvature out. Because remember, these star points are really going to be problematic for us when we're trying to control this curvature. So if I double click this edge, you see again it stops right there. We rotate this around, make sure that we do have the 4 sides right here. If I double click this edge, I get a little bit of a better preview. It goes a bit farther. Let's go to Modify, Insert Edge, and let's take a look at the preview. Preview is okay, but this time instead of that really small value, I want to use 0.5 because remember it's going to be in between the next edge. So it's going to put it right in between for us. We're going to say okay. Going to go back to a right-hand view. And now because we have the option to select a midpoint, I'm just going to go between here and here, say okay. Come back up to the top, repeat the process with my marking menu, go from here to there and say okay. Cross my fingers, go into smooth display, hide my edges, and now you can see that we're sort of carrying that around. It's getting really ugly in this corner, and this is what we would expect to happen because when we look at the edges that we have, if we bring back our box display, we now have a lot of really tight control happening in this corner. And then what ends up happening is it's transitioning into these really big surfaces and this edge right here. So what I want to do is I want to manipulate some of these edges and I want to push them back because right now they're in front of my geometry. So I want to select them and I just simply want to move them in. Look at this in smooth display and Control and 4. It already looks better. So that transition looks better. I want to move this stuff in as well. So let's go ahead and go back to box display. And let's just make sure that everything looks okay. Probably take these entire faces and pull them in just a little bit. Go back to our smooth display, hide the edges. Now, if you're really good at understanding where these edges are, you don't actually have to bring the edges back every time. So, you can hover over and you can find anything that you want. You can double click on edges and you can move them around. In this case, maybe scale them down a little bit. So you don't have to bring the edges back, but I do find that it's a little bit easier visually if you're doing that. So let's go ahead and bring them back. Again, this corner is really bunching up, and I think what happened is my edges are just too close together. So I'm gonna fix that. I'm gonna double click on this one in the middle. Note that it goes all the way around what we would want to see, and I'm gonna hit delete. Just get rid of it. Then I want to go back to my smooth display, Control and 4. And that looks better already. I still think that it's too close. It's too tight. So I'm going to double click on it. Notice that it ends here. And I'm going to go to Modify, Slide Edge. And I want to bring this in a little bit. It's hard to see the preview, but I want to bring that down. Notice that nothing really happened. So if this happens, if you get in a situation like this where it's not moving where you would expect it to, that's because it's not really it's not able to sort of mess with the curvature, and you might need to slide it the other direction. So you might need to slide it in the positive direction. And now that we've moved it closer, let's take a look at it in smooth display. Again, Control and 4. And I'm already much happier with that shape. It's a little bit ugly up here, but we can work on that some more. But I'm already happier with that shape. I've got my harder edge, and I've got the shape that I'm looking for. And really all that happened was I put those edges too close together. There was too much of a change in direction, and when those edges were really close together, it just could not calculate the normals. It couldn't figure out what smooth was supposed to be. We still need to fix a few spots. This one, for example, that needs to move, but I'm going to delete the edge. And I'm going to use insert point. And if we want the shape to carry on, we want to simply move it forward. We could do this by offsetting that edge a certain amount, or we can just try to do it manually. So from here, I'll probably bring this one up, hit enter, and then just simply delete that one. Let's take a look at it again. So it's already looking a little bit better. And I think what I want to do is take this edge that's here and I want to push it backwards. So everything that's sort of here, I'm going to take these vertices going to use modify edit form. I want to probably view this from the front, give me a little bit better perspective as to what's going on. Push them in. And what you'll notice is happening is this door line here, you can see that the shape is sort of triangulating out here and at the bottom. And if we go and look at this in smooth display, by pushing that edge in, we're going to get a more gradual transition. Now, it's important that we understand the overall and the entire process. And what I mean by that is we still need to add more edges here to make sure that we perfectly match the edge of the door. So it's not really imperative that we spend a ton of time in this area. If we look at the layout or the shape of these edges, everything looks pretty good. We don't have too much control on the big part of the fender, and everything looks pretty good in here, but we're probably going to have to delete some of these edges and redo them anyways. We've got the star point here and the one here, so we need to be really careful, in terms of what we're adding, but that looks pretty good so far. Let's add a little bit more control, and then we'll probably call this video now that we've added some of these details. It's certainly not done by any means, but again, I wanted to keep the content coming. If anybody's trying to progress on this, I want to make sure that at least you have a little bit of information so that you can add your own details as you're going. The next thing that I want to do is I'm going to double click this edge. I'm going to insert an edge. Remember, the first preview is going to be positive, so I'm going to say negative. I'm only going to do a single insertion, put it right in the middle. I'm going to do the same thing here, repeat the insert edge. Remember, the preview is in the positive direction, so we're going to go ahead and change that, and then we'll use insert point to go between these two and say OK. Now, the reason that we added one edge in the middle is because I want to flare this up. I want to begin changing this. So let's take a quick look in smooth display. We shouldn't really have done too much drastic to the shape. That vertex right there will need to come up a little bit. If we look at it in box display, it sort of sinks down. That's just a product of where the fender is attaching. So we'll probably need to move some of this stuff in. I'm not going to worry too much about it, but I do want to make some adjustments right now. So let's go ahead and do modify, edit form, take a look at it from the front. And again, this is where the fender is attaching. I want to grab a few of these vertices and sort of manually pull them in. This can get me into trouble trying to do it at this stage, but I do think it's worth it to try and smooth out some of this right now. And before we go too much further, let's take a quick look in smooth display, make sure we didn't drastically mess anything up. You can also manipulate this in smooth display if you're comfortable with it, and you can kind of get an idea of what's going on. We will end up adding probably another edge going around here, but at this stage, all we're looking to do is we want to add some edges to sort of add a crease that fades away in the top. So let's talk about ways in which we can make that happen. So generally when we use offset edge or bevel, something like that, what we're going to do is we are going to put edges exactly in the middle, or whatever the value is that we use, between the other edges. So if you have geometry that's tapering already, let's go ahead and rotate this around. It's going to taper. So it's not going to give you a tight crease. It's going to fade away naturally. And that's actually what I want to do here. So I'm going to say 0.1, say OK. Remember, we used a simple insertion mode. I'm going to go to Control 4, and you can kind of see that there's a little bit of a crease here, and it sort of fades away. It doesn't really carry along the top of the fender. So that's not the end result that I'm going for. So the way that I want to approach this is, if I want that hard crease, I need to put those edges really tight together. If I want a smoother, more gradual crease, then I can have them sort of taper apart. And the way that you would make this happen manually is by offsetting the ones at the back further, offsetting the ones at the front closer, and then inserting points in between to get the shape that you wanted. What I want to do at this point is I actually want to slide this edge down, and I want to bring it closer to this one here. So by bringing it closer to this one, I'm making a harder transition closer to that upper edge. Then I can go and try to do insert edge again. This time I'm going to tighten them up a little bit. We'll do 0.05, say OK, Control 4 to get rid of those edges. And now you can see I've got a little bit harder line on the top of that fender. I've got a much more drastic line. I'm carrying that crease from the door. It's kind of going around the intake scoop, but then it's also carrying out. So what this allows me to do is it allows me to really control the shape of the fender at the top. So for example, if we wanted to take these edges and bring them in, so we want the flare to happen later, then we can simply move those edges and then we'll have a more drastic flare out at the fender position. But keep in mind that as soon as we add these additional controls, we want to make the changes to the group of edges. We don't want to simply move one and then the other because the distance between these edges is really what's controlling the overall crease that we're making. Another thing that we can do is we can double click that edge and we can use slide edge. And in this case, I actually want to be in smooth display. I'm going to view it from the front and I want to watch the change that happens. I want to push it really close to that edge, say okay, and again, Control and 4 to get rid of it. And that shape looks pretty good. If we bring back the mesh body, you can see what we've done is we've added this shape where we've got that little crease that happens naturally in the door, and we're carrying that outward to flare the body out. So you can see that it looks pretty good. We could tighten that up a little bit if we wanted it to be tighter, and we can also spread it out a bit at the end. So the last thing that I want to do in this video is I want to show you how to spread that out gradually as we're going toward the back. So again, all of these edges are pretty tight together. What I want to do is I want to get rid of a few of them. So I want to select, let's just select 3. This is about where the flare really gets out to its full width. I'm going to delete those. And then I want to use Insert Edge. We're going to do a single. And remember, this is going to be positive, and I need to figure out where I want this to be. I'm going to put it about half. Then I'm going to use Modify, Insert Point, and I'm going to go from there all the way to here. So if we take a look at this in smooth display, Control 4 to get rid of the edges, what we should see now is that we've got a little bit more gradual transition as it gets closer to the back. In order to control this perfectly, we need to do the same thing on the other side. So we're going to delete those 3 edges. We're going to use Insert Edge. Again, it's going to be a negative value because the positive preview is putting it in that direction. And then remember, it's a percentage between these 2 edges. So we actually need to keep it fairly close. So let's try 0.1, and it looks pretty good. So we're going to use Insert Point. We'll go from here to there. And again, we'll go back to smooth display, Control and 4. And now it's a little bit hard to see with the mesh. Let's turn the mesh off for now. But now you can kind of see that we had a tighter crease at the beginning. Don't worry about this. That's just a graphics thing right now. But we had a tighter crease at the beginning, and now we sort of have a more gradual transition close to the back. At this stage, you can take a look at the shadows. You can see that we ended up having a harder crease here. We could delete some of those edges if we don't like that. You can always go back and say, for example, the one that's really close in between there, I'm going to go back to smooth display, Control 4 to hide the edges, and I'm going to delete it while we look at this in this view. And then, that sort of smooths it out. We keep that crease there, but it's not as dramatic, and that kind of helps tie in line with the other shapes. We're working with very smooth shapes here, very smooth shapes here. And again, all of these adjustments and things that we might want to do, we can use things like slide edge, we can delete, and we can insert new points wherever we want. If we want this to flare out a bit more, instead of keeping it horizontal, we're going to make it a bit wider here. And again, we can look at those results, and it's always a good idea to go back and forth, make adjustments, undo things, and so on. So I'm pretty happy with that result. I like the way that the shape is coming together. Remember, if we're making an entire fender or if we're cutting away most of the fender underneath, we don't have to worry so much about the stock transition because we're only going to leave probably 2 inches of the fender at the front. So we really just need to make sure that we transition well from the door, and then we can cut away all the rest of the stuff on the inside. Obviously, we need to add more control. It's going to be a common theme. But I think what I'm going to do, looking at this shape, obviously we need to spend some more time detailing out this intake scoop. I like the way that this shape is happening on the top. I think this design probably needs a little bit more detail around the wheel well and probably some adjustment to the shape in the back. Because of this crease, I think we need to tighten up this one down here at the bottom, simply because it just doesn't look right. And obviously we have a T-point here that we need to deal with, and because I can't leave well enough alone, I'm going to go ahead and just adjust that right now. Double click on this. I'm going to go to Insert Edge. We're going to do both. I am going to keep this one pretty tight. And then now when we look at this, Control 4 to get rid of those edges, we can sort of visually try to make these lines match up. So maybe a little bit of adjustment in this area, and we want to carry that line because that's where the fender is going to end. And again, we've got the factory bumper underneath here. So when we're looking at this, we're going to have the stock bumper, we're going to see the stock tail light, and we're going to have to add some more detail in here, some arrow fins and things like that. But this gets us pretty close. And we can always go back and, again, use tools like Slide Edge and make some adjustments to see how we might want to round that edge out or tighten it up. These are all things that we can do very easily in smooth display or in box display and just get the shape looking like we want. If you're following along or if you're making your own, at this phase in the design, what's going to be really important is adding the major defining lines for your shape. So obviously the intake scoop was critical because we've got some matching features on the door, and we need to sort of carry those around our design if we want to maintain the design continuity between the original car. And also things like this this detail that's at the bottom of the skirt, because we don't have an additional add-on skirt. We're transitioning from the stock. And then this stylized line or this feature that's controlling the shape at the top. These are the major defining curves. And obviously we added that little lip around the fender, and that's just, that's kind of a standard feature that we want to do. But at this stage, I think it's looking pretty good. I don't know that designs like this are ever really done. Unfortunately, you can always do more. And there's still more that I want to do. But again, I just wanted to add some additional content. If anybody's trying to follow along and do their own, now you have a bit more. So at this stage, obviously add comments if you have any questions, if you run into any problems along the way. I did mention in one of the comments that I didn't have a game plan necessarily going into this. I didn't pre-model it. I didn't pre-decide what the shape should be because I wanted the process to be organic. I wanted it to be true to form. I think a lot of that is lost in tutorials or training content that is specifically made to get one point across. And it's always hard to convey the design intent and the design process. Not so much the use of the tools. We did a lot of that in the Fusion Mastery videos, but in this case, it's really where you're making these design decisions along the way, why you're making them, what impact might they have, and how do we fix them? How do we undo those things? The last thing that I want to say with this design is I think I want to add one more stylized line that goes between these two and carries up over the fender and gives me a little bit more shape. It's not going to be drastic, but I do want to try that, and it's going to be an interesting experiment because our patches don't go that direction. That means we're going to have to change direction again, potentially. So I'm going to think about that a little bit more. I think that might be the direction that we might be going with this. But so far, I'm pretty happy with the results. If there's anything that you might change in the design process or anything that doesn't quite make sense, again, please leave a comment. Let me know. I'll try to do my best to answer honestly. And as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.